Welcome, everyone. We're going to give it one more minute and then we'll jump right in. All right, let's do this. We only have an hour, so we're going to jump right in. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Unrecyclable by Design, the problem with flexible and film plastic packaging. I'm Lucy Mullany. I'm the National Policy Director with the Alliance for Mission-Based Recycling, and I also serve as the VP of Policy with Eureka Recycling in Minnesota. And I will be your moderator today. So before we jump in, just some housekeeping. You all should be muted, but feel free to use the Q&A tool to submit questions at any time. We'll address as many as we can during the Q&A portion. I think there's a chat feature. I actually don't see it, but if there is, you can share your comments in there and feel free to introduce yourself in the comment. And then the session will be recorded and we'll share it afterwards along with any other resources that we've mentioned during the session. There is closed captioning if you need it. You can click on the CC or live transcript button to enable. And then the webinar runs for about an hour and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So I'm really excited to introduce our speakers today. I'm joined by Miriam Holsinger, who's co-president at Eureka Recycling in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Martin Bourque, executive director with the Ecology Center in Berkeley, and Prigi Arasandi, founder of Ecological Observation and Wetland Conservation in Indonesia. A little bit about who we are. AMBR is an alliance committed to keeping resources in the ground, prioritizing waste reduction, and being the voice for a strong recycling system that returns materials to manufacturing, reduces the need for virgin resources, and helps build a transparent, regenerative economy that is just and equitable for all. We are recyclers, and we use our view from the pile to inform our zero waste advocacy work. And our focus is packaging and single-use products. We know that a lot of packaging is not designed for recyclability and certainly not designed for reuse. We need to invest in reduction, redesign, and toxics elimination. And today we're going to be focusing on flex and film packaging. So what is flex and film packaging? Flexible film packaging refers to lightweight, pliable plastic material used for consumer and industrial products. You're probably seeing it everywhere. Common types include plastic bags, shrink wrap, wrappers, bubble wrap, air pillows, pouches. You see a lot of products moving to pouches. And really, film and flex is the fastest growing type of plastic packaging. There are estimates that it makes up about 50% of all plastic packaging on the market. And new laws are being enacted in the United States known as Extended Producer Responsibility for Packaging, or EPR laws, are in 7 states that include recycling rate requirements for producers, industry. And industry is really feeling the pressure to address the issues related to film and flex packaging. And rather than looking at reduction or redesign, we're seeing a real aggressive move toward claims of recyclability. Today, we're going to dive into that. We're going to dig through what that looks like, why it's a problem, and the real environmental justice impacts globally if we don't address it with real solutions. So before we dive into that, I'm going to toss it to Martin, and who's going to kind of zoom out and give us a view of how the petrochemical industry, plastics industry has pushed recycling for unrecyclable plastics in the past and what the results have been.
Thanks, Lucy. Great to be with you all today. I wanted to just sort of start with a cautionary tale because we've seen this before when the packaging and plastics and petrochemical industry was under a lot of pressure to find end-of-life solutions for a wide range of rigid plastics, they launched this program called Collect All Plastics, and it was funded by the American Chemistry Council. And they kind of went conference by conference, city by city, trying to convince all the cities to force their recycler to accept all of these different kinds of unrecyclable plastic packaging in their programs. We know that just number one and number two narrow neck bottles are the closest to being recyclable, and that all this other range of stuff really wasn't. But there are arguments where if you collect it all, you'll get more of what is actually recyclable. And if you collect enough of it, there eventually will be a market for it. And they were really seeking to appease consumer demand and pressure from consumers on brands to have more recyclable packaging. And in the end, this promoted just a lot of wish cycling. People threw everything into the recycling bin. And then the expectation was that recyclers like us would be able to do something with it. Next slide. We call that era the dirty decade. It really started in the mid aughts in like 2004, 2005, along with single stream recycling, and took really until China rejected accepting any mixed plastics in 2017 to put an end to it. That was sort of the beginning of that, and I'll show a slide about that next. But just go back one slide. Yeah. So what we found was that we had initially a market for that material, but it was basically most of it was going to landfill, and they were sorting out what they could. When that market dried up really quickly, it went into the informal market, and we tracked it with GPS trackers. And what we found was quite horrific. There was informal sorting of that material for the small amount that was actually usable for folks in China where it was landing. But then it was being washed in rudimentary systems that were emptying right into surface drain water, being dumped and being burned. And so it wasn't, now we can go to the next slide. It wasn't really until China's National Sword Program in 2018, the blue bars here being all the export of that kind of plastic that went to China, and then the brown bars here being other non-developed nations or developing nations. And you can see there's a huge surge in plastic that was dumped and burned in those countries as a result of this policy. And it wasn't really until National Sword and then later the Basel Convention amendments that restricted international waste trade on mixed plastics that we sort of got this back under control. So we're hoping we won't see a similar process with flex and film, but the way it's shaping up has all the same hallmarks of the oil and gas companies, the petrochemical companies, and the brands all starting to try and figure out ways to at least call flex and film recyclable. Next slide. So these EPR bills that Lucy mentioned around the country, most of them have requirements to cover flex and film packaging. And the brands are freaking out about that and know that these laws have real teeth and real impacts. And so they're putting together these flex and film recycling coalitions. You'll note that on the list here, there actually aren't any recyclers. It's all fast-moving consumer good brands, retailers, and related industry groups and consumer-facing brands. And so we're seeing like these kinds of collaborations popping up all over the place all the time. It seems like every time I open my email, there's another one of them that's getting started. Most recently, the new one from the recycling partnership is called CalFlex, and it's trying to do a proof of concept for the collection of flex and film in curbside recycling programs in California, where they feel like if they can get a footing in California, they would be able to sort of drive the national debate in that direction. Next slide. And so we know that these strategies have failed in the past. This is not a new um, goal to try and make those packages recyclable. We had wrap for well over a decade, industry funded project that was supposed to be a drop-off program. And mostly, the retailers were collecting post-consumer flex and film packaging in the front of store. You might have seen these in a supermarket or a Target or a Walmart or something, but they weren't actually getting recycled. And then there was the Dow Energy bag where they said they were going to chemically recycle it magically into new virgin pellet. And it turned out they were just warehousing it and in the end burning it in cement kilns for energy with very limited um, regulatory oversight. And then there's these bag the bag programs, which were tried in the early 2000s, and largely all the recycling programs quit, like this one here in Ecology, quit doing that, which was you would bag them all up and tie them up and throw them in your recycling bin. And the recyclers found they really couldn't do anything with those. So these, were all fails. And now we're seeing sort of the zombie effect where these are coming back from the dead and they're trying to revive them as at least marketing ploys to convince us that this stuff is recyclable. And I'll hand it off to Miriam now from um, Eureka Recycling.
Thanks, Martin. Yes, I'm Miriam with Eureka Recycling. It's really great to be here. And I'm going to talk about some exploration we've done and trying to figure out, what can or can't be recycled and why. And we're really seeing these two false solutions getting floated as like the answer to this flex and film problem. So one is, oh, can we just put it in the cart? Everybody wants to know that. And then the other is this magical thing called chemical recycling, which like someone said once, it's neither chemical nor recycling. Um, and which some people think, oh, can deal with all kinds of hard to recycle products. So I'll go into more detail about those. Go ahead to the next slide, Lucy. So the first issue with plastic bags, regardless, oh yeah, no, go back to that. Yeah, this is a perfect slide, is that even if they can be captured in the MRF, it's very difficult to do so. So this piece of equipment is in almost every single MRF, and that stands for Material Recovery Facility, where all of your mixed recyclables go to get sorted. So all the stuff from your recycling cart comes here. So this is a piece of equipment that separates two-dimensional material from three-dimensional material, and all of the cardboard goes up over the top, and the bottles and cans are supposed to fall through or go down to the bottom. And what happens is you can see all these plastic bags wrap around that. And so then the bottles and cans don't get separated out from the paper as they can. So a big issue that we found with flex and film in the cart is that it just disrupts the rest of the recycling process. Go ahead to the next slide. So knowing this, we at Eureka we love going where we think maybe we shouldn't go, and so that we can really talk in detail about why we shouldn't go there. So we did a study a couple years ago where we were like, okay, let's say what happens if you actually do try to sort out the stuff that's coming to our facility anyway, right? We know probably about maybe half of the residual, half of the stuff we can't recycle that comes into our facility is flex film and pouches and stuff like that. And so we're like, let's just see what it would take to pull this material out and can it be recycled? So we did about a 2 or 3 month study where we trained staff to identify recyclable film, which is actually really difficult because about half of the plastic bags and film that you see is not actually what they would call a monomaterial. And so when at any time it's multiple materials combined, it really, there's no market for that. It definitely cannot be recycled. Whereas if it's stretchy and only one thing, like your clear grocery bag or a bread bag, like those could, in theory, if they're clean and dry and go to the right place, be turned into a new product. So we're like, okay, let's see if we can separate those out. That said, we have an incredible employee base. So many facilities around the country use temporary employees. Almost all of our employees are full-time with benefits. And so the average tenure at our facility is about 6 years, which means that they know their material. So it's probably a little easier to train our staff than it might be to train other staff. So before we did the study, we did a number of audits to see what was in there. And then for 5 to 7 weeks, we hand sorted out the bags in two different spots in our facility. And then we also looked at like, okay, manual labor is difficult, right? It's expensive, it's hard. So what happens if we go to more automation and more technology? Would that improve it? So we looked at some quotes for that as well. And then we actually sent what material we sorted out to a company that actually can make plastic trash bags out of film to see like, okay, if we do separate it out, can we recycle this? Go ahead to the next one. So this is just a very rudimentary view of what happens in our recycling facility. So we've got our pre-sort house, which is where we try to pull out all the big stuff that causes problems later on. So this is where we pulled most of the plastic bags that were in our facility is in this pre-sort house. So during the study, we had 2 extra people there whose only job was to pull the plastic bags. Then that area that says screening, that's where you saw that screen that was all coated in those plastic bags. So that, as I said earlier, separates the bottles and cans from the paper and cardboard. And so then if you kind of follow the 2D arrows down, you can see what's SRPN, that stands for sorted residential paper and newspaper. And so that's the other spot where we had staff because we know some of the smaller, like grocery bags, bread bags that you don't see in the pre-sort, because they're light and flat, just like paper, that's where they were ending up is in our paper line. So that's the other spot where we had some staff there trying to pull material out. Go ahead to the next slide. So when we did this study where we quantified how much material were we able to remove, and then we also looked at what was in our audits, and so to get a sense of were we capturing it all or not, one thing we found was there's huge variability. And so it's really hard to say, how much is there and were we capturing all the material or not. So in the pre-sort, when we did the audits, we found anywhere from 126 pounds per hour to 215 pounds per hour were in our audits. When we had staff hand pulling it, they were able to consistently pull about 120 pounds per hour out of the stream and recycle that. Oh, and then in the main sort, where that's where they're pulling it off of our paper line, we saw a lot more potential. Now, it's a very small part of the paper line. I always like to tell people it's maybe 1% of the paper, but because paper is about 40% of the material, 1% of the paper can still equal a lot of material. So on the high side, it was around 318. On the low side, it was around 83, but you can see our staff were only able to capture about 36 pounds per hour. And that's because the stuff that was ending up in the paper line is really small and light, right? And so the interesting thing about recycling is we get paid per pound. Everything is measured per pound. So plastic bags and pouches and film, all the manufacturers have moved towards them because they're so light, it makes it really cost effective to ship in them. But then what happens is if this material was recyclable, that means the amount of effort to the amount of pounds you get is inverse. So it's actually really expensive to sort them out and prep them and try to get them recycled. Go ahead to the next slide. So when we took those pounds and then we turned it into staff costs and labor costs and equipment costs and stuff like that, here's what we found was that in the pre-sort, on average, because we were able to collect a little bit more, right, it cost us about $1,000 per ton of material that we were able to collect, right? And then, and I'm saying per ton because that's how we think about things. Although I always think we should turn it into pounds too. $1,000 a ton is about 50 cents a pound, I think. Sounds right. And then in the main sort house on the paper line, it was like over 3 times that. Once again, because you saw how much less our staff were able to collect because it's so light, difficult to get that material. Now we did get a quote for optical sorters, and we are like, well, what if we use those? And optical sorters are equipment that uses a laser and a puff of air to separate material by type. And that was actually more like 5,000 dollars per ton. That was based on our kind of current volume. If we assessed a really high volume, it could maybe get down closer to $1,000 per ton to separate this material out. But that cost uh, is untested because similar to staff, optical sorters can only do so many like puffs of air per minute. So you have the similar problem that you have with the staff where maybe they're more efficient than staff, but because this material is so light, and small, it just gets really hard to get any return on costs. Now, for comparison, right now in Minnesota, it's maybe about $80 to $100 a ton to dispose of material. So that's where, if you're trying to say, like, is it cheaper for us to separate this out for recycling or for us to dispose of it, the answer is disposal. Now, we don't always look at that. That's the joy of being a nonprofit. We can be like, no, but really, what is the best in all of this? And this is where we keep going back to the best option is really to think about using a different material, right? It's so expensive to sort out, and there's really not much revenue or benefit. I'll talk about where it might go and get turned into later. And there's so much of this material that, especially in a MRF system, there's just not really a good way to separate that. Go ahead to the next slide, Lucy. So as you saw, like the cost was really hard. The other issue with plastic film in a facility is how flammable plastic bags are. They're actually made from oil, so they will cause fires and expand on those. Additionally, the wrapping around equipment that you saw causes breakdowns and staffing issues. It also contaminates other material. Even after we did this study, when we have material getting pulled out of the system, we still are finding plastic bags in our paper. Additionally, the end markets we have were very minimal. So the one we sent to actually can make plastic bags, but they get a lot more film than they need. And right now there's just way more film than is needed. And so while some of it certainly can be made into bags or lumber or other things that you hear about, um, really we also just need to have less of this stuff in the first place. Go ahead to the next slide. So one thing that in trying to expand markets and say like, no, 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 this stuff can be turned into new material. You see a lot of these like end markets where they're making it into little gravel or little noodles or other stuff. And once again, especially anytime it's land applications, is then we start getting concerned about microplastics and other issues in the material. And additionally, if, you know, as Lucy said at the top of the hour, we're really trying to keep material in the ground. And so we want to reduce the amount of plastic bags that are made and then make sure that if there are really needs for those, they can go back into plastic bags again. And that really helps close that circle and make that a more sustainable system. Go ahead to the next one. And I think now oh, I haven't even gotten to chemical recycling yet. Oh no.
You're fine. You're
I
fine.
am.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So then the other thing that people try to say, because right now a lot of the plastic bags we talked about, they're hard to capture. They cause problems in the MRF. They can't really be made into these new materials that easily, but they're also, as I said, they're made of all different kinds of things. You'll see pouches with silver linings and clasps and all kinds of stuff on them. So a lot of times people are saying, oh, we can just take all hard recycled, non-recyclable things and turn them into this chemical or advanced recycling. And so the issue with this is similar where it's really expensive. We've also looked at some of the impacts of this, like because we're like, we don't want to recycle just to recycle. We want to recycle because it benefits our community, because it reduces the impacts of climate change or the causes of climate change, and it helps our environment in general. And a lot of times with chemical recycling, because of the chemicals they're using, because of the energy needed to do that, there's actually not necessarily a benefit to this. Keep going. Or is this the last one on mine? Oh, it is. Okay. Yeah, so that's just the other thing is that a lot of times if people say like, oh, we can take all of these plastics, I would just be very skeptical of that. And that's there's many technologies on that that we're continuing to look into. But at this point, there's no easy solutions. Okay, so now I'm going to pass it on to Preeti,
Yeah,
right?
I'm just gonna make, sorry, one second.
Yeah.
Miriam, thank you so much, Miriam Martin. Just as an FYI, I'm sure everyone has noticed this, the chat is not working, but the Q&A is. So any comments or questions, please add to the Q&A, and we're gonna get to that in the discussion. But I'm really excited to welcome Preeti, who I introduced at the top, but welcome to the session, Preeti. If you want to take some time to introduce yourself a little bit more and then really dive in, you know, now that we've kind of heard about, okay, this is like the impact on the recycling system, but what is like the global view? What are the environmental justice impacts of like continuing to produce an flex and film plastic?
Thank you, Lucy. Please show my presentation. Yeah, my name is Brigadier Sandi. I come from Indonesia. So Indonesia is We have in my province, we have 25 pulp and paper company that we using paper waste from imported from the developed country as our resource. And we have over the past 5 years, Indonesia has import paper waste primarily is from USA, and then from Japan, from German, and then from UK. And the biggest exporter of paper waste is USA. Uh, for our 25 recycled paper mill operate in my region, we need more than 2 million metric ton paper waste per year, yeah, annually. So, but since China banned the import waste, so we have impurity is more than 40%. So can you imagine is 40% is that paper that we import from the developed country is content with the plastic. 25% of the plastic waste that smuggle in the paper waste is multi-layer is sachet. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, this is so we have so many small scale company, small scale using the plastic as a fuel because we think the plastic is more cheaper than wood. It's ten times cheaper. So we using the scrap of the plastic sachet as a fuel in the some of the area like tofu company, and then for the limestone small scale company. So we using the plastic as a fuel because the paper company is don't want plastic is problem for them because it's difficult to recycling. They say that this difficult to recycling for our company, so we sell it. So they sell to the small scale company as a fuel. And next, and you can see how we using plastic, yeah, as a limestone. So we have a lot of pollution of the PM 2.5 and PM for PM 10. Yeah, is I think it's 10 time or 100 time than the standard. Uh, Next, you can see and then after we using the plastic as a fuel, there is no place to maintain the fly ash, the ash, and then they only dumping the open space in a lot of city because if you manage maintenance the ash is high cost, so they only dumping in the open space. Yeah, we can see this location is in East Java, West Java, because in East Java and West Java we have a good management on water, so we always have a water in every years. So why there is so many recycling paper company that is they establish in my region because we have a good management on the water. But unfortunately, in the downstream, we using the water from the river as our drinking water source. 98% our drinking water source in the five city in the East Java, we using a river. Unfortunately, in the upstream, we have 25 uh, pulp and recycling paper company that using the import waste that they are always dumping water waste without treatment. Next slide, please. So in 2025, 2021, we have a regulation that the impurity of the plastic inside the paper bale is less than 2%. But the reality is we found 10% to 45% is content with multi-layer plastic contamination in the paper. Yeah. And then in the downstream, 2 years ago, we found a big fish and we opened the stomach, and we found so many sachet, yeah, inside the stomach of the big fish. Next. Yeah, you can see this is what I before. So please. Okay, this how our paper company is dumping waste without treatment to the river, yeah. So recycling paper contaminate with the plastic generate microplastic that are discharged into the river, in the same river that serve as drinking water source for a million people across the 3 cities in East Java. So in our research as detect microplastic in drinking water consumed by local community, and then river use irrigate for the shrimp farm is a critical protein source for our city and another 3 city, and the key export commodity. Yeah. And then the water is contamination with the microplastic. This what we done in more than 68 river in Indonesia is all is contamination with microplastic. And then we do some brand audit, and we found that 40% the pollution, plastic pollution in the water is a sachet, is multi-layer plastic. Next. And then 2080, we have a research. We do take a stool, poop sample from the 100 people who live in the river, and then we found all our sample is contamination with the microplastic. And then the interesting fact is that 26% the plastic, the polymer plastic is EVO, ethyl vinyl alcohol, waterproof and airtight material in sachet is we found in our stool. It means this our river is contamination with the microplastic, and then we using the water as our drinking source, and then the sachet ethyl vinyl alcohol is contamination our body. So for us is we must reduce, contamination your plastic, multi-layer plastic inside our paper that we import from the USA. And then because the multi-layer sachet is often end up as a fuel in small scale industry like tofu production, cracker manufacturing, and limb processing, because it's 10 times cheaper than the previously used wood as a fuel. And then another reality is the dioxin level in egg from this area, so that is 80 times than the WHO safety limit, is making plastic burning zone the highest dioxin contamination egg hotspot in Asia. Next. Okay. Yeah, I think we we have a problem with the multi-layer plastic. Uh, Actually, now we always still import paper waste from USA, UK, and German, and then we still found that the paper that we import from the developed country is still contamination with the multi-layer. We still found, and then there is no strong regulation in our country. So why is smuggle plastic inside the paper is running continues. So I think if you want to help us, you must stop using multi-layer packaging, because it's difficult to recycle. And in Indonesia, we only burn as a solution. So please stop using a multi-layer plastic as a packaging. Thank you, Lucy.
Great. Thank you, Priggy. So if folks have questions for Priggy, if you could put it in the Q&A. So just to sort of reiterate, industry is pushing flex film for, for it to be collected at the curb, pushing for chemical recycling as a solution on how to recycle this, continuing to participate in waste colonialism, and environmental justice communities, BIPOC communities, low-income communities are most impacted by the devastating impacts of plastic in general and growingly flex film specifically, or increasingly, excuse me. So we need to consider real solutions, considering alternatives to film and flex, and prioritizing reduction and innovating towards refill and reuse. If we must collect this, pushing for alternatives to the recycling card, especially using deposit return systems, making sure we're not pushing full solutions like pyrolysis, plastics for fuel, chemical recycling, and calling that recycling, and other greenwashing full solutions. And then digging deeper into EPR for packaging, which we can talk more in the discussion, but because film and flex is a covered material in the US under these EPR programs that came up in a question, including in Minnesota, that means that industry needs to meet the standards for the requirements for that type of material under the law. And that means recycling targets, collection targets, and they are trying to get around that by pushing, again, full solutions, weak oversight. And so when we look at how we really need to advocate for EPR policy design, and also in the implementation stage, we're looking for ambitious and enforceable reduction targets, laws that prioritize reuse, specifically excluding flex and film from curbside programs. And then, okay, let's see if you can collect it through alternative means. And if not, then it's not viable for sure. Include strong definitions for what responsible end markets look like. Are they protecting people and the planet? Are we getting the yields that we need? Are we prohibiting chemical recycling and advanced recycling? And are we prohibiting industry from using mass balance, free allocation mass balance accounting for recycled content claims, which is another way to try to get around the definition of recycling under these laws. So we're going to move to the Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing. And if our panel wants to come back on video, that would be great. So we have gotten, let me just organize my own screen so I can see all the questions. 1 second. Here we are. Okay, so we have gotten quite a few questions in the Q&A around alternative collection programs. Do they work? What does that look like? What are the options out there? What are the end markets for those? So I guess, Martin, if you wanted to take that first, and Miriam, if you want to chime in, that feels like a question for you guys.
Sure. Yeah, there are. So I identified some of the previous fails in this arena, and we're seeing a resurgence now in those efforts. And largely, they're funded by, in the past, they're funded by companies like Dow and 3M and the sort of full range of brands that you saw on that slide earlier. So the question really for some of these programs is, can they stand on their own? You saw the cost that it takes at a MRF to manage to just pull these out of a MRF, and that it's like 50 cents a pound. So the question, Ridwell has been raised. It's a curbside collection program for hard to recycle materials. They typically do collect soft packaging, flexible and film, usually depending on what their regional market is. They usually want what everyone else wants, which is clean, dry, number 2 and number 4. This is like your grocery bag or your produce bag or your bread bag. Doesn't include a multi-material pouch like what your Trader Joe almonds might come in, or other kinds of pouches that might have film. They don't typically want candy wrappers or chip bags. So there's a whole range of things that they may or may not be able to handle depending on the region. There are some solutions. There are some markets for just general mixed soft packaging. And what they do is they just kind of densify it, melt it together, and put it under pressure, and then grind it up into some form of aggregate that can be used as gravel is one application. So you can go to Home Depot and buy smart gravel and spread recycled melted plastic in your garden if you want. They say it's adds to drainage. It's and used in drainage applications. There's a hydroblocks. Hydroblocks is another market they talk about from Ridwell, where they're sort of melting this stuff into these nurdles, these noodles. They were in Miriam's slide, but they kind of compress those together and use that as like a drainage or filtration source. And those, obviously both of those solutions are really focused on are going to be releasing plastic directly into the environment. So we would consider them very irresponsible end markets. And just to note, they're very weak markets. These are a very few number of companies that are trying desperately to do something with this material better than throwing it to landfill, often with subsidies from the brands to try and make something happen. And our experience is that in the long run, they won't last. They won't pencil out. Another application that we hear a lot about is a roofing material. It's where they take this same mixed plastic and they kind of melt it together and press it between two pieces of paper or even a kind of cement fiber to make a roofing deck that would go under an impermeable roof surface. It's a very limited marketplace. So how do they intend to push all of the flex and film that they're manufacturing through these tiny sort of afterthought markets? And we just don't see it penciling out either financially from a collection and processing perspective or from a volume or scale perspective. A couple others are up here on the slide. Thanks, Lucy. Nextrex has got a program collecting at retailers. This again is clean and dry number 2 and number 4 bags. And then TerraCycle, you can pay, and they've now moved from a box to a pouch as well. You can buy a TerraCycle pouch and fill it full of plastic and send it back to them. They were sued previously for false advertising when they lost their markets and just ended up warehousing all of the material they were getting from their customers. And Hefty is now selling these Hefty Renew bags, and this is basically put it in a bag and put it in your recycling, and then they'll burn it, or if they can find a market for it, they will, but they'll use it for fuel for a cement kiln or other kind of direct plastic to fuel burning. So there's stuff out there. I think Ridwell is the one that's gotten the most visibility and traction lately. They're, I think, in their second round of investment and investor funding. We'll see what happens when they have to stand on their own 2 feet. It's already quite expensive, even with the subsidies they're getting from their investors. But will it actually be able to stand alone? I don't think so.
I think another thing is just to think of the scale. So right now they estimate about 1% of this material is getting recycled. And that's with all of you all probably who are participating in Ridwell or bringing your bags back to, the grocery store and all of that stuff. So with this voluntary drop off, very tiny amount is getting recycled, and that's already flooding the end markets. So that sometimes by the value of the material, right? The less of something there is, usually the more valuable it is, or the harder it is to mine it. So for a baseline, sometimes I like talking about aluminum is worth maybe anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 a ton, right? Or about 50 cents to $1 a pound. And plastic bags you're lucky if you can sell that for a penny a pound. So as we talked about in the Murph, it maybe costs $1, and then you maybe, if you're lucky, will earn a penny in revenue from that. So you're losing 99 cents a pound every time you try to separate that out. And that's not even counting the cost of collection. Which is a whole different thing. And that's the other thing with Ridwell. I think I saw on that slide, it was $18 per household. Your city recycling fee may vary a lot depending on the efficiencies and the size of that. But I think a lot of times that might be like $10 a household. And that's for all, right, of the recycling that you put in your cart, which is a lot more than you put in your Widwell box. So just going back to like, these are interesting pilot programs, but they're not going to scale up to the level we would need to actually have meaningful diversion and going back to like keeping stuff in the ground.
Thanks, Miriam, and Martin. Yeah, and just like listening to you talk, like no matter what with plastic, like regardless, we continue to have the toxicity and environmental justice impacts, like no matter where we're at, like with this, just like it really stands out. Just really quick, Miriam, could you like very quickly, there were one of the clarification, difference between pouch, or maybe Preeti, this might be a good one for you too, pouch, sachet, like how you would define those, a pouch and a sachet. I guess anyone. I'm going to throw that out to anyone.
I can start if Brigitte doesn't want to jump on. So a pouch is usually a multi-layer, more complicated material. You might buy your granola in it. It might have that resealable top, and it could have a silver lining that kind of helps keep the food stable for longer. Whereas when I say plastic bag or film, usually that's just any type of plastic that's like stretchy, flexible. We use that. That's like the broad group of material, and then a pouch is a subset. A sachet is usually, we don't see them as much in this country, but they're usually like little individual tiny pouches of products. So a lot of times, if you travel somewhere where people don't buy, like they might not buy shampoo in a big bottle, instead they'll just buy little single serving sachets of a product. Or you might see them in gas stations too, right? Where you're like, oh, I don't need the big amount. I just want a little individual. So they're usually like maybe 1 inch by 1 inch, and they just have like one serving of shampoo or candy. Or so I guess I don't think of it, but sometimes those single serving mints also are probably in sachets.
Yeah.
Yeah, the main
Yeah.
use of sachet. Go ahead, Fergie.
It's like a small thing that make efficiency. Yeah. People in Indonesia in developing country is like a sachet is helping us because the price is cheap. And then if you in here we packaging everything with the sachet, shampoo, tomato, sambals, everything with the sachet. But the problem is after we have the throw it, we didn't have a good waste management, so we are throw it everywhere. And then if you want to recycling the sachet, it's difficult because if you want to recycle plastic, is must be one species, you know, PET, LDPE is must with one group. So sachet is multi-layer, especially aluminum. We have aluminum foil inside the sachet. It's difficult to recycling. And then now, 2 months ago, we have a research on the all because in the canteen of the school, in the school in Indonesia, we have all of drink and snack is packaging with makeup with the sachet, and then we that does have a research that all the food then drink and food snack is contamination with microplastic, and then every day our children is you know digest all of the food, all of the drinks. So I think it's have impact on our health and our environmental. And then if you want to fast solution, you burn it. You burn it. So it's not solution because we have dioxin, we have furan after we are burning the sachet. I think it's a problem, yeah, for us. It's not efficient, it's not effective. It's like a long-term problem. Sachet is a
Yeah.
long-term problem, yeah.
So that like gets so one of the questions I had and then came up in the speaker is around the Global Plastics Treaty. So Martin, I know you've been engaged and you're heading to the next meeting next week. And Preeti, you've also been engaged in GPT work. So I'd love to hear like how Flex and Film is showing up in those conversations. But one of the questions we had come through was that they have heard like representatives from industry that is engaged in GPT advocating that they can recycle any plastic and handle any growth curve in plastic waste, and wondering how do we counter that sort of that push for endless plastic growth in favor of endless demand for recycling, as if like the two, okay, well, we can just do the two together. So that was a lot, but
Yeah, it's interesting. My first meeting I went to was in Nairobi about 2 years ago, and I saw a presentation there. I saw two presentations that impacted me a lot. One was from the Ministry of Environment in Japan, and they had this whole very in-depth presentation about how they were recycling something like 90% of the plastic in their country. And then when you finally drill down into it, it turns out that they were sending all of the plastic along with their municipal solid waste to incinerators, and they call that recycling. And so we don't call that recycling in the US, certainly not in California. Um, waste to energy, plastic to fuel. These are not technologies that are considered recycling and not classified or regulated that way. So on the global, in the global scene, people use different language. They have different ideas about what things mean. The other presentation I saw there was by a municipality in China. I'm forgetting exactly where, but where the local government was just paying people for used pouches. It was pouch focused, and it was like a bottle deposit system, but for pouches. And instead of the consumer paying the deposit and then getting the deposit back later, it was just the government, the local municipal government, just paying people to get them back. And it was to avoid pollution. And they were then using those for waste to energy fuel as well. But it was getting them out of the environment. It was addressing their litter problem. And so it kind of depends, like, what problem are you trying to solve for? And different countries and different regions have really different focus. And, we all are facing many of the same problems. Was striking to me in the Global Plastics Treaty context is that while everybody's facing different problems, particularly on the extraction and, oil and gas extraction, petrochemical processing, pipelines, like these are all very harmful, very toxic, very problematic industries for the people who live near them. And then in the middle, all the brands get all the benefits of cheap, highly merchandisable, food contact friendly, highly marketable, easy to use, consumer friendly pouch. And then everyone else has to deal with the disposal on the tail end. And so while our problem focus may be different geographically, all the brands are the same, and they're all at these meetings, and they're all they're all saying things like what you just said, Lucy, of like, oh, don't worry, we got this, or technology is going to solve the problem, or don't get in the way of innovation. For a lot of the consumer facing brands, the issue that they have is a marketing problem. The consumers are concerned about the environmental problems that their packaging creates. And so a lot of times what they do is then come back with a marketing solution to try and convince people that, oh, it's not so bad, don't worry about it, without really solving the fundamental problem. And, that's where, as recyclers, that's where Miriam and I come in. We actually have to face this stuff in real time. And, it's in the growing pile of things that get in our recycling bin. And so, if we can't live without pouches, now I'll just say, like, almost everything that's in a plastic pouch today or in plastic packaging today was in a cardboard box, or was in some other kind of wrapper, or was in a glass jar,
yeah.
or was in an aluminum can. It was in something else yesterday that was way more recyclable than the pouches today. So, but if the consensus globally is no, we need this stuff, then let's find a better way than this recycling bin to try and address it, because it causes so many more problems when you put it in the blue bin than even going through, say, a TerraCycle or a Ridwell or a Trex type program.
Yeah. Miriam, I'm wondering if you can take this next question. So talking about, responsible end markets. So how can municipalities and consumers know if their waste is going to, like, being shipped overseas and going to Indonesia, and polluting their environment, or if it's a responsible domestic end market. And maybe talk a little bit about like, if there's ways EPR through third-party certification or anything like that, like how, or even through stronger definitions could address that.
Yeah, it is very difficult. There's some EPR states that have a responsible end markets rule in them that really does require some sort of verification and certification around where material goes. And so that is a great place to go. If you don't have that, you can still really talk to your current contractor or hauler, or ensure that your city council and public works people know that you care about this subject and want to know. I know with many of our municipal contracts, we have to provide information on where our material goes on an annual basis. So that way, they know exactly where it's going. We also like to tell people what it gets turned into. So those are a couple different places where people go if they want that info.
Yeah,
And it looked like,
one point I'd like to make on that is, even with all the investment that the, environmentally focused recycler like Eureka or Recycle Ann Arbor, or EcoCycle, Ecology Center, et cetera, even in those cities like San Francisco and other leaders where they are really investing in trying to clean up the existing plastic in the paper, it's still slipping through. The system is not built to handle it. So those pouches and soft, flexible things, they follow the paper into the paper bill. And even investing millions of dollars on optical sorting and new technology and staffing to pull that stuff out by hand, and robotics and AI and all of it, is still getting into the paper and ending up in Priggy's backyard. And so, I'd way rather have that in a landfill in California, where I know what it's doing here, and that we're not, diverting harm to somebody else. That if we're going to call it diversion in California, let's find something that it, is really beneficial, rather than something that we're exporting harm to somebody else in another country. And most of the paper on the West Coast, certainly out of California, goes to export markets in Southeast Asia. So, we can be sure that it's already a problem, as Priggy has pointed out for us. But imagine if every municipality in California suddenly said, hey, oh, don't worry, all that stuff's recyclable, put it in the blue bin. What a nightmare that will cause, not just for us in our local recycling programs, but for whoever receives those bales of paper, in other countries.
All right, we have a minute left and I have some announcements to give. So I'm going to do lightning round. If I know I hate this when I'm on a panel, but if you could, let's end on a good note. Like one thing you would love for people to like do or take action, like where they feel like they can do something on this issue. Let's just popcorn it. So whoever has one, go first, and then throw it to someone else. Yeah.
Last month we have a research with the Wonjin University in South Korea, and then we found that we research on the 30 the blood waste speaker, and then we found a lot of microplastic, and then the monomer of the plastic inside the waste speaker women blood. Yeah, so I think it's plastic is already inside in our body, even in the placenta, in the womb. The safety place in the earth for the people is already contamination with microplastic. So I think we must stop using a multi-layer plastic that difficult to recycle. Please stop and harm us, because what you do in the US is pollute our river, pollute our air, and then now we have evidence that we are already contaminated with the microplastic.
Thank you, Priggy. Miriam?
Yeah, I think really advocating for reuse and reduction. I know a lot of times we all want to do all that we can, but individual action is not gonna save us here. So I would say don't beat yourself up if you fail to avoid that plastic bag either. That really we need to make sure like our representatives and legislators know that this is an issue and that we're not going to recycle our way out of this problem, that we really need to turn off the tap right at the front end.
Yeah, what Miriam said.
Great. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for coming. We are going to share out the slides, additional resources. We do have a policy brief on flex and film coming out in the next couple weeks, so we will share that out with this group. And yeah, just a reminder, like, we cannot recycle our way out of the crisis. Recycling is used by industry as like the solve for everything, and we know we can't, but we also need strong recycling to get to zero waste. So and we need that recycling to be authentic. So thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate our presenters, and a big round of applause to them. I hope you guys all have a good evening, or for Priggy, a good morning.
Morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time to have chance for me to present our problem here.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Priggy. It was really great to hear from you. I really appreciate you joining. Thank you.